We're in for a big one today, so let's avoid wasting our time on a long ass intro. This video is going to involve me ranking every episode that I will acknowledge from the 9th season of Death Battle. Obviously this is all my personal opinion and not fact. You can feel free to disagree and talk about it as long as you're civil and not a massive chode in the comments, which frankly is a hard task in this community that can't even tell Uguay vs Vern is a joke, so yeah, let's just start. Also, I'll be mentioning my favourite and least favourite scene of each episode for the sake of not needing to remake that one video I did.
Is that me? Is that me stronger than me? I'll f***ing kill me!
Sorry, I still don't like Gogeta vs Vegito. You'll notice I actually wrote a few of these entries and recorded them before this episode came out because I expected this episode to be better than at least the next few, but I'm just not a fan. I think I should articulate better that I do appreciate the effort that went into it. I think the effects are really pretty and all that, but the animation is very stiff to me. The choreography is almost exclusively just shot-for-shot recreations of things that have happened in Dragon Ball with nothing new and original. In fact, the only thing this episode did that I went, wow, that's creative to, is Gogeta using 2 Spirit Balls, which is Yamcha's thing. Other than that, this episode falls flat in every way to me. A pair of analyses that feel unfinished because they're stretching one character's worth of versus analysis into 2 analyses of essentially the same character in function, story, and moveset, with the main difference being how some of their moves look more or less in a couple specific attacks. The animation is a boring, average affair that tends to just be the most expected thing I've ever seen, and is either taken from Dragon Ball's existing choreography, or taken from this very same DBX matchup. The voice acting is good, but they have no good lines to go off, and I still don't like the death at all because it makes no real sense, and only really the fist bump does it for me. News is good, can't deny that, just like I can't deny the effects are great, but the conclusion feels so pointlessly stretched for a matchup where the result is literally just, objectively speaking, Dragon Ball officially recognizes Vegito as stronger, and the only way to argue otherwise is to ignore what has literally been said in official sources as they're more consistently saying that Vegito's better. That or use Dragon Ball Heroes, which despite including, adds nothing to the episode. They do not use their hero exclusive forms or moves in this animation, they barely bring up anything for scaling or debate in the analyses, and they just do the most obvious zero effort jokes of, wow, those names are silly, and wow, this is just like a fanfiction. And clearly didn't factor it into the debate, because debate-wise, the two scale to each other if you include full composite stuff. And it's kind of annoying to me how much they just jerk off Goku a lot in recent Dragon Ball episodes, but this episode goes the opposite direction and basically says the main reason Gogeta loses is because Vegeta sucks. I didn't even think the small difference in power output between Vegeta and Goku would even be a factor at all, when you consider the much bigger factor of just Vegeta has twice the time to play with when it comes to burning through the power of his fusion. Which again, is not a factor if you consider Heroes, where frankly they go into way higher forms and power outputs than ever in canon without an issue. That's all I have to say. It's a bland episode that has nothing to stand out whatsoever to me personally. My least favourite scene is either the tone-deaf variety line or the absolute disappointment of a Big Bang Kamehameha versus Final Kamehameha we got. My favourite is the intro with Goku and Vegeta interacting because I like those two characters a lot and it's a fun little moment to begin the fight with. Moving along.
And then fucking Forrest Gump shows up!
Every season of Death Battle has had one episode that on its release disappointed me and remains a disappointment. In Season 1, I was disappointed by how awfully one of my favourite characters Death Battle has ever used was treated in Starscream vs Rainbow Dash. In Season 2, Ivy vs Orchid and Nightmare vs Guts both were incredibly underwhelming for my favourite fighting game series of all time's first and as of now only steps in a Death Battle, and so on and so forth, with Mewtwo vs Shadow in Season 3, Metal Sonic vs Zero in Season 4, Thanos vs Darkseid in Season 5, Zuko vs Todoroki in Season 7, and Macho Man vs Kool-Aid Man in Season 8. Season 6, I don't remember my full thoughts on every episode, but the disappointment nowadays would be Aang vs Edward Elric, and Season 9 unfortunately managed to do this too with one of my favourite matches of all time. Jason Voorhees vs Michael Myers. This episode to me falls flat in almost every way, with the exception of the analysis. The analysis is generally a fun time. I really like the cutaway gags, which remains a weird sentence coming from my mouth. I found some of the jokes amusing, and just hearing them talk about these characters I love so much was great. However, with all that being said, I don't share the same reverence that most seem to for the analysis, even amongst people who also weren't fans of the episode. To me, the analyses really fall flat in the versus department. After all, this is a versus show, and to me the ideal analysis would have a solid balance of story and versus stuff segued well into each other. Jason vs Michael however really drops the ball in my eyes when actually talking about the stats of these characters. They mention the 2 survive explosions with no elaboration, and that's it, with them later claiming in the conclusion that these two are roughly similar without any form of calculation or context given to these feats. Which is kind of alarming when visually Michael's looks significantly bigger. Now I know as part of the community that Michael's feat has been calced to several hundred kilojoules and Jason's was calced to over a ton of TNT, making Jason's way more impressive, but without that context it just looks like Michael's is way bigger. Likewise, they don't really do anything for strength and speed. I know they might not have wanted to make the results seem as obvious, but just bring up some proper strength feats for the two. They have some. I can accept not giving them speed feats because a lot of it can really be attributed to teleportation, but why not some strength feats? Without prior context to these characters, what you get from these analyses for how powerful they are is Jason can survive a building explosion, his machete is strong enough to pierce metal, he can kill you with his bare hands, and he can flip a car. For Michael, you'll know that he can survive a building explosion and that he can flip a car. That's it. There's not a whole lot of verses in this versus analysis, and while I don't want verses to overtake story for an analysis, I also don't want the reverse. If you go to either extreme, you get an analysis that is either entirely discussing the functions of the character's power set and not who the character is or what they're about, or you get an analysis that is a poor recap of the vague storyline, personality, and arcs of the combatant that doesn't fulfill the main purpose of the analysis in the grand scheme of the episode. And so while the Jason and Michael analyses are fun, to me they are barely versus analyses. Especially on Michael's side, where it feels like they just barely say anything about him. Again, I understand they didn't want to make it seem like a stomp, but at least mention the car flips out loud instead of just a sidebar, and maybe bring up some actual feats of strength that don't immediately tip the verdict, like Jason tossing people absurd distances through the air and busting through doors, or Michael pounding his way through doors and sending people flying through the air. And the fight is barely a fight. The primary focus of this battle is on Joe Victim here, with Michael having less than a minute of screen time in his own episode, and Jason only really getting around a minute due to an 18-second long shot that lingers in him walking into the distance for way too long. I want to bring up something that I've heard people say to justify it. It feels like a cheesy horror movie crossover focusing on the pointless characters nobody likes. There's two problems with this. The first one is that would mean to justify liking the episode, you have to say it's true to bad things in the source material. The episode is justified in doing something bad because the original source material also did something bad. I don't hear that justification for other things. I don't see people say that Shao Kahn being poorly animated is okay because he's also poorly animated in his own game. If Liu Kang was in Death Battle and he was animated really poorly, do you really think people would say, oh, that's okay because he's animated poorly in his own game? More importantly though, that's just wrong. It's comparing entire movies and comic runs to something that's just meant to be the fight. While Freddy vs. Jason and Jason vs. Leatherface both have a lot of focus on boring, pointless side characters, when the two lead villains actually fight, the focus is on the fight. In Jason and Freddy's dream fight, the majority of the time was spent on Freddy and Jason fighting. While there is time taken out to look at the protagonists, the majority of the entire sequence is focused on Freddy and Jason. Same with Jason vs. Leatherface. When the two fight, the focus is on Jason and the Sawyer family hashing it out, not spending most of the time on irrelevant characters to the conflict. This is not how the two would be in an actual crossover, because in an actual crossover, the part that's focused on them fighting would primarily be about the two fighting. I can't imagine people would have used this argument to justify if, let's say hypothetically, Predator vs. Boba Fett focused on some army people watching the two fight, and didn't actually feature the two fighting for most of it. Do you really think people would justify it as, well, Alien vs. Predator primarily focuses on humans instead of solely the two fighters? Or let's say Godzilla vs. Gamera. If that episode was primarily focused on some nameless humans just talking on a scientific computer about what's going on, and occasionally we'll see about 10 seconds worth of the two fighting, do you really think people would just be like, oh, that's okay, the episode was great, because that's how it is in classic kaiju movies? No, because in all of these cases, when movies and crossovers focus on two characters fighting, it's about those two fighting. It's not about random people, not to an extent where the two characters fighting only interact 3 times, one of which is almost entirely off-screen, and the other is this awkwardly animated super speed martial arts context. It's a bad argument because it completely misses the point, and it feels like the argument made by people who haven't actually watched these movies. Also, speaking of the animation, I understand that when this episode was being made, the sole animator Devil Adams was going through a rough time in his life, so he likely wasn't in a position to dedicate all of the time or energy necessary to the episode, which I completely understand. I don't think he should have been putting this episode ahead of his own personal problems. However, I don't think that's a defense for the episode, at least for my criticisms, because very few of my problems with it actually stem with the quality of the animation. With the exception of this sequence and the weird super speed turn that Jason does later, I think the animation quality is fine for the most part. My problems with this episode are with the writing and the base concept behind how they did the fight. With that being said, the people who decided to make their only response to this episode, I wish Torian was doing this instead, thus basically reducing a large chunk of the response Devil Adams got to, you are inferior to Torian, are all scum. You should have just stayed shut up, because that is incredibly disrespectful to imply that just by virtue of being himself and not being someone else, he is inherently inferior. And hey, as I said, very few of my problems with this episode stem from the quality of the animation. I just don't like the idea of this fight focusing so heavily on this minor character. having him there on his own is fine. If Joe Victim showed up and was killed very quickly, and then maybe there was some other large group of people getting murdered, then that would have been fine, but the random victims should have been a supplement to the fight, not the other way around. This is not what Jason vs. Michael should have been, in my opinion, because it basically isn't Jason vs. Michael. The ending is Jason vs. Michael, sure, but it leaves me with this feeling of dissatisfaction like, that was it? You know why I didn't get that feeling when I was watching Freddy vs. Jason, regardless of the overall quality of the movie? That's because when it was fight time, it was fight time. The two go on for a while hashing it out, and I'm aware the fight in the movie is way longer and way higher budget than this episode. But those things are not at all impacting why I'm more satisfied with the movie than with the episode. There are plenty of Death Battle episodes, in fact the majority of Death Battle episodes, where I'm satisfied with the animation, and I don't think that's it by the end. The reason is that Freddy vs. Jason focuses on the two fighting, with the characters that nobody cares about only being there for the purpose of the plot that has been set up over an hour of admittedly mostly boring movie. The Death Battle focuses on a character that nobody cares about with no story relevance or purpose, being because this is his first time showing up, and barely involves the two actual characters fighting. Now the episode is not without its positives. As I said, the overall quality of the animation is fine. In fact, knowing that Devil Artemis was unlikely to be able to pull off his best for various reasons only makes the quality more respectable in how it looks overall, with a few great minor details, some generally decent shots, some fun references, and sometimes jank that is actually amusing, and an overall decent ending, aside from the fact that the way it's portrayed is the moment Jason tries giving a shit, he completely bodies Michael and one hit leaves Michael shaking and quivering, while Jason just no-sells what's thrown at him. Oops. Oh, I should mention also, the atmosphere does not work for me, because what atmosphere? The stock scream takes away any atmosphere at the start, and most of the fight is super high paced and really does not work to make these two feel creepy at all. As a fan of these two characters, their series, this matchup, and cheesy, dumb horror adjacent films that focus on characters crossing over to kill each other, this is not an episode that I can truly say I really like in any major regard. If anything, I dislike the most the justification of saying it's like those movies, when fundamentally it is not. It would not be a fair comparison to make anyway, in my opinion, as a movie and a 3-minute animation are doing completely different things. Their goals are different. As for my favourite and least favourite shots, my least favourite, not counting all this because of the context in which this episode was animated, is probably just the awkwardly long period where Joe Who Gives a Fuck is looking around in first person, and then Michael hits him and it does nothing. I don't care if this is a Dead by Daylight reference, because I don't play Dead by Daylight, so this is lost to me. All this does is cement the idea that Michael is not a dangerous threat in this episode, when not only is Jason no-selling his attacks, but so is a random Joe. My favourite, however, is probably the opening sequence as a whole. Ignoring the very dumb stock scream, the camera work is good, Pamela's line referencing the first Halloween is both a fun reference, and a line that just sounds cool without the context of the movie. And I think it's a really generally cool setup for the fight, including multiple fun references. With what's almost Jason's MKX intro of dragging a corpse and yanking his machete out of it, along with Jason's penchant for killing people in sleeping bags, and Michael's first person shot and his iconic coming out of the darkness suddenly scenes, it's a very solid start to what to me is one of the most disappointing episodes in the show's history. But I do want to say, this episode, despite being my least favourite of the season, has one of the greatest accolades I can give it. In a year that has had some of the most frustrating and aggravating waiting periods I have ever experienced, as well as what is the worst 2 weeks I've ever had in the community by a wide margin and will never be topped for as long as Death Battle exists, this episode this year stands out as having one of the best, if not the best waiting period that I had had. Only 2 waiting periods actively brought enjoyment out of me, and this is the one that did it the most. I got to have so much fun talking with friends about these characters and the matchup, about how much we like these movies and these stories. I got to re-experience films I hadn't watched in ages, and it left me just happy during a point in my life where everything was just really bad. And while the following episode continued that feeling for a while, this is the episode where the waiting period really stood out to me in terms of just how much I enjoyed it. When it comes down to it, I'm still happy the episode happened. I'm thankful it was here at all, because I know the long-term disappointment of how the episode came out will persist far longer than the short-term enjoyment I got from the waiting period. But given how bad it was during the time before and after that waiting period, there's no way I can't be thankful. This is a waiting period that I can look back and smile on, and at a time when most of the year just ended up pissing me off and most of the waiting periods were miserable, that's a feat that I can't really give many of the episodes this year.
Mr. Beast!
I think it's telling that the most noteworthy element of this episode to me is that the narrative of the animation makes more sense with my explanation of John Yautja as a specific former jungle hunter Blackblood Yautja who stole a Spearmaster's scythe. Boba Fett vs John Yautja in almost any other season would not be the second last episode. Let me get that out of the way right now. You should know that this is in many ways a testimony to the quality of the season, that this is what I put near the bottom. But it is down here for a reason. Rewatching this episode, I really wanted to enjoy the analyses, but I just couldn't. Boba Fett's is so dull to me. It feels like nothing has changed since season 2, but the jokes getting worse and Boba Fett getting the funny stick, which, to their credit, is a big plus, because it is the funny stick, and not including that would have been quite the expensive fail. However, a lot of what they said feels like nothing has progressed since his last appearance. They still mention the same feats of outsmarting Windu and fighting Vader, and about the only thing I felt was added is 3 things from Book of Boba Fett and the calc for thermal detonators, which feels weird to me. I don't know, did season 2 really have so thorough an analysis that there wasn't anything new to talk about with Boba? That seems off, especially considering most of Boba's season 2 analysis was just his season 1 analysis.
The Predator.
His analysis was less so written poorly, and more so written in a way that, as a Predator fan, left me really unsatisfied. It felt so weird to give an overview on this entire species that is so complex and nuanced in this way. It's like if they did an episode analyzing Wookiees, except even Wookiees don't have all the stuff going on as a Yautja, with different tribes and clans. I mean, actually Wookiees probably do have that, but different characters with stories and tales that are all the center focus of each part of the franchise. There's the important distinction between blooded and bad-blooded, and the episode, I don't think it mentioned the tribal thing at all, which is the most important thing with the Yautja species. It feels wrong in a lot of ways to talk about the Yautja in a way that makes us come across as if any tribal clan, blooded or not, would have all the same equipment when that's blatantly not it's objectively not true. Even with equipment shared between clans, they have differences in design and functionality. There's a lot of times they keep saying the Predator as if they're talking about a single individual, and it doesn't work for me. I get that to the average person who may have seen 1 or 2 of the Predator films at best, this isn't really that big a thing, but to me it does stand out as weird, having been a long-time fan of the series. It'd be like if they did an episode, as I said, on Wookiees, and they put him against a single individual opponent. Let's say, instead of Worf versus Chewbacca, they did Worf versus Wookiee, and they just analyzed the entire Wookiee species, calling them the Wookiee, and they just ignore the differences between different Wookiee groups. They even seem to posit the self-destruction as if it's meant to be a weapon to kill their opponent. They barely even mention the timer beyond offhandedly saying a countdown has started. See, this gets to me because they talk of this as if this is a blooded elder Spearmaster Yautja they're analyzing, but then they go and act like the self-destruct is meant to kill the person that is fighting them? No! It's not meant as a way to kill the person who bested them, it's there to get rid of evidence that they were there, to get rid of all their equipment. The entire reason that there's a countdown is to give the person who won time to get out of the blast radius or get behind cover. Now, if at bad blood, the kind of Yautja who would actually try to kill you with their self-destruct was to do it, they wouldn't include a timer, they just detonate it. Which, it makes it weird. Why would... The timer thing is important to the ending of the fight, but if there is a timer, that means the self-destruct is not meant to kill the opponent, so it's irrelevant. I know I'm bringing outside context into this video, which I generally try to avoid doing, but this really, really bothered me, because it just feels so inadequate as a Predator analysis. It feels like they just tackled nothing that I wanted. This is a problem that only really fans of Predator will identify, and that's a problem, because then you got people saying, oh, the Predator analysis was so good, and like, it aggravates me so much. In terms of positives, I don't dislike the start of the Predator analysis, and the end of Boba Fett's analysis is fine, but that might be about it. Other than that, I am also just not a fan of the animation. From a starting point, I think the lighting is inconsistent. Sometimes it works for me, and sometimes it doesn't, but usually it seems a bit flat and dull. But on a more positive note, the animation does a lot of cool things. The start is great. It feels just like how I'd expect, including a first-person shot to emulate John Yautja's home series. It's awesome. Boba Fett shooting John Yautja out of the air is cool, and I love the shot of the plasma caster taking Boba by surprise. Later on, a lot of the melee action is pretty good and lacks the major jank that permeates a lot of the SFM and Blender episodes. The fluidity of the funny stick fight is great especially. However, I think the writing really is lacking something. For one thing, both of these two kinda come off as brain-dead stupid at points. I have many questions, but one of them is, why does John Yautja stop using this plasma caster? In the storyboard, it makes sense, because Boba Fett pulls out a pistol and then loses it. So John Yautja does not know that Boba Fett still has so many ranged weapons. As far as he's aware, he's taken away both of his guns and his backpack rocket, so he stops using the plasma caster to be more honorable and fair. But in the animation, Boba literally shoots back with a wrist laser. John Yaocha knows that his opponent still has a ton of ranged equipment, so why is he only using the throwable disc that Boba has a chance of avoiding? And on that note, what's with Boba's 360-degree vision suddenly vanishing here? He can see John Yaocha coming from behind, but then he spontaneously forgets. I don't expect Boba to be perfect. In fact, I'd rather he make mistakes that theoretically contrast with an expert century-old Spearmaster. Like, you know, him not being able to avoid his jetpack malfunctioning and crashing, that works for me. And him being mashed in melee and even bested at multiple points and having to rely on his trickery and arsenal works too. But him just being this fucking stupid does not. It also feels like they were trying to get across Boba's dishonor and shit, but again, it doesn't work. The only time it seems they try to, it relies on John Yaocha being an idiot. He sees the blood going around the tree and decides to stab the tree? Why? You don't know for a fact that Boba's there, and can't you just look slightly upwards and see him on a tree branch very clearly visible? He has to be a major idiot to allow this. Another thing, what's with all the explosions in this episode? The thermal detonator is a massive boom that feels very impactful, even if it is just green screen 2D explosion effects over a 3D background. But Boba's backpack rocket that is described as nuking small aircraft has this tiny little pop on the floor. And John Yaocha's self-destruct not only lacks impact compared to the detonator, but it's the wrong fucking color! The Yaocha self-destruct is famously blue. How do you screw that up? You didn't have Luke swing around an orange lightsaber back in season 1. Oh, and then the shot after it's done makes the boom look really small. This just looks like a small impact here, because there's no frame of reference to scale, because these trees to me just look like little bits on the floor when I first saw it. And despite their conclusion relying on Boba Fett needing to escape the self-destruct's blast radius, he just stands there and tanks it point blank unharmed. I know cinematic timing and all that, but there's no indication he realized something was off and turned to run. Literally, it would have been as simple as having Boba Fett react to John playing his own audio back to him, and then turning around to run off screen before the boom happens. Was that really too much? That's not even the only thing they failed to represent in the animation based on the conclusion. Boba Fett could avoid a predator with his jetpack and long-ranged options. Except Boba spends most of the fight in melee, loses his jetpack immediately, and is not able to hold John Yaocha back at all. He's even directly outclassed both times John Yaocha uses ranged equipment back. Boba Fett's flamethrower would mess with the thermal vision. John Yaocha is able to see him just fine after being shot and only fucks up at the end a good time after. Nothing a predator has can withstand lightsabers. John Yaocha survives 2 hits and not even his dreadlocks are cut by the lightsaber. Only his plasma sight's handle is cut. Fett uses dirty tactics. Not really. Boba Fett only needs to get 50 meters away to survive the self-destruct. He's literally in the middle of it. He survives. It's also not great that they do not mention any of the self-destruct's downsides until the end. You know, they just don't bring up the fact that it has a 40-second long cooldown, or that Arnie escaped it until the conclusion. And that ending. My god. Not only do I not like Boba saying, "You are one ugly motherfucker," because that just does not sound like something he'd say, and is just a pointless movie reference, frankly, he might as well have said, "I need to get to the chopper," before running away from the self-destruct. But I also just don't like this entire sequence. While John Yaocha does overwhelm Boba as you'd expect, the way he's fighting seems extremely amateurish with these long overarching swings and 5 hours of wind-up time that anyone in a fight would take advantage of with ease. He's fighting like an idiot and somehow only beats Boba probably just because Boba has one arm. And then he just randomly stops before hitting Boba with a killing blow. I get it, maybe he can't see Boba due to the thermal vision and the fire, but Boba literally has a lightsaber that later we see is hotter than the flames around the area. It's fucking visible. How did he miss that? Boba didn't turn it off, it's on right here. He can tell Boba hasn't moved, and even if he has, why not swing down anyway, just in case, you moron. Finally, those dreadlocks. This one is not a big problem, this is just a result of time more than anything I'd imagine, but sometimes they're just as stiff as a big erect cock and about as distracting. So yeah, to me this is an episode with severe writing problems, with John Yaocha being a complete moron who has no idea what he's doing, and only a few sequences that I like, those being the weapon fight ones because they're actually pretty good. My least favourite part of this episode has to be John Yaocha just stopping before delivering the killing blow. If he's an Elder Spearmaster, which he has to be by virtue of having a plasma scythe at all, he would have swung down or at least put his foot down on the opponent to make sure they can't move despite not being able to see them super clearly. Yeah, why didn't he do that? If he's a Spearmaster, he would know, I might not be able to see him down there, let's put my foot down to make sure I got him in the right place. Hell, I didn't even mention how both the spear and the scythe he uses randomly show up both times out of nowhere after he's caught in an explosion. For a fight that's relatively more grounded in reality than most episodes, that's just shitty. On the other hand, my favourite scene is Boba Fett cauterizing his own cut-off arm with a lightsaber. That's metal as hell, and a really cool character moment that shows off Boba Fett's intelligence, as well as his determination, adaptability, and pain tolerance. A really great shot. I wish there was more like it in the rest of the episode.
God, you're such a deep character.
Deku vs. Asta is an episode that my opinion hasn't changed on much, as should be expected due to its recency. I still think it's decent, but overall it's not one that stands out to me, being about as generic and average as Deku himself. I think the analyses are good enough. Deku's isn't super interesting to me, but it is really well written, and Asta's is just painfully unfunny, but at least it is interesting. And the fight is kinda there. It's hard to explain why, but this animation is just super boring in a lot of ways, and it doesn't even suffer too many technical problems until the end. There's relatively limited jank and pretty decent sound design. I just don't find the choreography very exciting. Deku sure is fast and hits Asta a lot, and Asta sure does hit Deku once or twice. Wow, Deku sure did do the same thing over and over with Asta not even trying to stop him. Well, Asta did destroy that building, but I think the big thing that takes away from this fight is a problem that other Sprite episodes this season don't have, a really just confusing and weird ending. Not only do I still not like Asta killing Deku like this, and yes, the arguments against me were just as bad as I predicted in that review, because Deku died here. Asta didn't need to stab him. Why is this in the episode? This is obviously a friendly tournament because it would be super out of character for Deku to engage in mortal combat. Out of character for Hercule Satan to do that too, and they literally say it's a world martial arts tournament. You know? Literally the ones from Dragon Ball, which is set up for Hercule's cameo at the end. Why would you... Oh, everything suggests this is a friendly tournament. The only thing that would suggest this is not a friendly tournament is the fact that Asta kills Deku at the end. How apparently Asta can sense when people are dead. He would have known Deku was dead here. He decided to stab him for no reason. I just don't like his disappointing conclusion. Asta's lack of a powerful scream for it, the two shooting to the ground, creating a boom, then teleporting back into the air where Deku somehow punched horizontally and only sent Asta straight down while cutting him a bunch with a blunt force collision. It's very confusing and poorly portrayed, as is Deku throwing this building earlier, and the teleporting from in the air moving away from each other to on a building running towards each other. I also want to note, because I forgot to mention it, but what the hell is wrong with Black Whip in this episode? This does not look or behave like Black Whip, it's more like Venom's symbiote goop in this episode. Finally, I was told very conflicting things on Asta's portrayal, so, I don't know if this is accurate or not anymore. So instead, I'm just going to label it as Asta was portrayed as annoying as fuck and brain dead, and I'm not going to comment on if that's accurate or not. Yeah, there's not much to talk about that I haven't already. I spent 30 fucking minutes on it, I don't know what else to add.
No more rhymes now, I mean it! Anybody want a peanut?
Scarlet Witch vs. Zatanna remains a very middling episode with some positives that do shine a bit. The analysis is fine. Wanda starts with bringing up her originally shitty powers, which is neat, and all things considered, the flow of Wanda's growing power into her snapping and the House of M event is good enough. I do wish that they brought up the fact that she did not affect the entire infinite multiverse, because they say it like she did, and then later on in the episode they say she didn't. It's weird. Zatanna's analysis is also fine, but it's really hard to say anything because it's super unmemorable to me. They list off a lot of powers, sure, and there is some great editing, and some moments in both analyses are really cool and get off the impact of what they've done. But the whole thing is kind of unmemorable. The animation, meanwhile, I think has all the problems it did when I first watched it still. Which is not to say it lacks positives. Because this episode does have one thing that almost every animation this season does, it is visually stunning. The effects look incredible, with Wanda's red misty effects looking admittedly a bit dull next to Zatanna's blue, but still looking pretty good. And Zatanna's pop off the screen with colour and brightness. The sprites look great aside from Zatanna not packing her pants on this day, and more importantly, the sprite work is great. They're animated super well, getting across emotions very cleanly, the rigging is on point, and things like Zatanna's universe juggle and Wanda's shit yourself scream look really fucking good. In fact, from a visual standpoint, my only problem is that Zatanna looks a little flat at the start. Aside from that, it all looks great. Especially when Zatanna interacts with the screen. Honestly, the start isn't even a huge problem. Yeah, I think the reason for them fighting is a bit weak, but Zatanna still playing to the crowd is pretty cool and characterful, as is using her weirder, wackier magical spells compared to Wanda's straight up forward fuck off and die spells. With special mention to the fucking Superman face punch that cracks me up every time. And the ending of the fight is also pretty good, with Wanda growing out of the curtains being a really cool visual, and Zatanna making a Megamind reference being awesome, especially with her then reaching out of the screen. I do have some issues with Wanda's characterization here. She just destroys this universe with billions of innocent lives on a whim. Why? Wanda is a hero above all things. She's been hit once and seems barely agitated, but kills all of these people anyway. Now, her having her outburst I can kind of accept as a concession for Wanda in general. It was kind of inevitable that due to her outburst being a big part of her character and necessary for the climax, and Death Battle only having 3-minute long episodes these days in terms of the animation aside from finales, that Wanda was going to come off as a bit of a piss baby, which she is. But I think her outright killing all these universes because Zatanna barely hurt her is still a bit ridiculous even with that in mind. It's not like Zatanna actively pushed her to lose it, she throws her through universes that visibly do barely anything to Wanda. Other than that though, the ending is visually great, with a great cry from Wanda's actress, and of course the No More X scene which is necessary. I kinda wish it was more like the storyboard where Zatanna visibly reacts to it, but it's fine, and the death is pretty creative, with each slam of the coffin box, we'll call it, bringing back sound bit by bit, ending with Zatanna pulling the black screen itself open like curtains with this amazing hand-drawn bit that's full of life. Her bringing the corpse back to a cheering crowd is a bit awkward, because I probably wouldn't be cheering if I saw this, but that's how it is. I say that, but I absolutely was cheering when Zatanna won. My problem, however, is the middle. The middle of the fight is a slow, boring clash between Superman and Hulk, interrupted by the sudden appearance of Wonder Woman and Thor to just end it. This has kind of the problem that Dr. Fate vs. Doctor Strange did, where it's mostly melee, but this time it's definitely done better. See, what I think my biggest issue overall with the fight is the lack of them actually using their powers for anything creative. Zatanna makes chains, becomes rabbit, summons heroes, makes shields, grow in size, reaches out of the screen, and then does the kill. Wanda literally just uses telekinesis, summoning, and explosion and shit. Oh, and she grows big too. That's it. I know the argument of, well, they're not going to include everything, and yeah, like no shit, they don't have all fucking day and that'd be boring. But the fact is, they spent nearly a minute on just the two posturing and summoning cape shit to fight for them. We get enough of just muscleheads punching each other on Death Battle. We came to this one to see weird wibbly reality stuff, and this time could have been spent with more wacky visuals. That said, I mean, it's not a massive deal that ruins the episode. I think the animation is a fun enough time, if a bit generally dull. Obviously, Zatanna steals the show. Zatanna is the big draw. She's full of character, she's bursting with life, she has all the best moments, she uses way more powers, she has much more flair and style. Meanwhile, Wanda is just kind of annoying. She doesn't do anything for most of the fight but telekinesis and lasers, she screams like a bitch over nothing and then dies unceremoniously. But I like Zatanna and I don't like Wanda, so I'm glad Wanda sucked. The conclusion though is actually pretty great. They really go into just how perfectly they counter each other, and how this really came down to the mentality of the characters. The winner was not determined by feat scaling or abilities, but by who these characters are at their core, and that's pretty cool. What I will give this episode undoubtedly though is that while the waiting period was boring and lame, I did check out some stuff with Zatanna after being intrigued during the prediction, and I came back very much loving the character, to the point where she's now my favorite female in the entirety of DC Comics. Zatanna's amazing, and I love her. She's also the only character I had no opinion on that this season turned me to loving. Even if it wasn't from the episode itself, it still counts, bravo! In terms of my least favorite scene, it's just generally the cave shit fight. Superman vs. Hulk is really slow and boring, and especially with these characters, kinda just lame. And then Thor and Wonder Woman instantly ended like the writers realized, oh shit, this is lame, let's get rid of it. Now my favorite scene's really hard. It's either the Superman punch or the Megamind reference, both are great. Hell, it might also be Zatanna's pose at the end, that entire hand-drawn bit just gives me fucking life. If you're wondering right now, wow, aside from one segment where he has problems, it seems like he kinda really likes this episode. You wouldn't be entirely wrong, I have really warmed up to it. I still rank it pretty low and I wouldn't give it a high score if I was still doing those, but I do appreciate the episode for what it brought, and just being a cool representation of one of my favorite superheroines, which is pretty damn cool. Yeah, I do find the total package kinda dull, with the analyses being super unmemorable and animation having a solid balance of good and bad stuff, and the conclusion is the only part that gets a completely good thumbs up to me. But it's not bad by any means. Again, a testament to how good this season has been.
Tell me, does a god such as yourself feel fear?
Who's asking? Oh, no, you're asking. Just is there anyone else asking?
This is the one that most people are going to disagree with me on, I think, and I don't really give a damn. Thor vs. Vegeta is very dull. It has its moments, definitely, some of which I consider peaks of the entire season, but the whole package is super weak to me given the hype that was built up for this episode. Thor's analysis is not that great to me. There's multiple points where they say something that immediately jump into feeds without really anything connecting. The most egregious to me is that they say Thor had to learn to be more than a warrior, but be a hero, after saying that not everything can be dealt with just by hitting things really hard, and then they literally immediately show him dealing with villains by hitting them really hard. And they talk about how hard Thor can hit, and once that's done, they then talk about how he can make himself hit even harder. It's just weird to me. The only parts that actually got my attention were the start where they talk about mythology and move that along into Marvel Comics, and the ending with the finality of Ragnarok. Those were cool. The rest was a lot of feet dumping, and not in a Hulk vs. Doomsday way where they go so rapid pace it feels super insane, just sort of, yeah, okay. Vegeta's has a problem where it feels sort of bare next to Thor's, but this one I'm more forgiving on, because Vegeta just has not got as much to talk about. I do think Vegeta's analysis flows much better, and it doesn't feel like there are any points where they abruptly stop to talk about something else. They talk about something and then they either finish talking about it or they flow that into the next thing, which is much better. No, Vegeta's problem is different, and admittedly a result of me bringing outside knowledge in, but it feels a little weird for them to bring up Spirit Sword and Hakai as things that Vegeta does, as if those are things he does. The Spirit Sword I don't care about, they barely mention it, and yeah, he can do it, it's just he only ever uses it to jump onto a stadium. But Hakai is made a big deal of, and I don't think he's ever done a Hakai. Goku is better at Hakai than Vegeta's. Why is this being treated as if like he's a master of Hakai? But that's basically all I can say against Vegeta's, because for the most part, it's pretty decent. Though they do the thing again with almost every Dragon Ball episode where they suck off Goku and his ideology, which I'm getting tired of. Can we not have some more Dragon Ball analyses where they don't talk about how great Goku is? I can kind of accept it here because it is important to Vegeta, but come on. But the fight is where I draw my problems, because this is not Thor vs Vegeta, this is Vegeta featuring Thor. And not in a Wanda vs Zatanna way, where Zatanna stole the show, but Wanda still got to do stuff, you know. She threw Zatanna around, she whipped out her magic and forced her to shield multiple times, she turned off her magic and blew up universes and matched Superman with her own magics. No, in this case, Thor does absolutely fucking nothing of note until the very end. At the start, he gets punched up and knocks Vegeta out of the air, then he swings and misses, he gets his ass handed to him and throttled, he looks like he really struggles to absorb a Big Bang attack, then he misses Vegeta entirely and only succeeds in making Vegeta fall over unharmed. Then he gets fucking throttled to shit, and only at the end he starts managing to match Vegeta, and even then he still just gets hit with the most brutal attack in the episode, and then he just wins. It either has the energy of Thor barely tried and the moment he did he smashed Vegeta to bits, or Thor wasn't paying any attention and Vegeta's power escalation feels pretty unwarranted because he's winning at basically every point and barely has reason to transform. Why does Vegeta go into Super Saiyan Blue? Because Thor pulled out an axe and was swinging super slowly with two weapons that Vegeta was easily dodging. What reason does Vegeta have to Hakai the axe when it's not doing anything? Vegeta has never done Hakai before. Why would he spontaneously decide,
Ah yes, the time to use it is on this harmless axe I've not been hit with?
Vegeta then fucking throttles Thor and says, "Am the Prince of all Saiyans," like they cut off his line at the start or something. His Big Bang attack then does absolutely nothing, so at least Thor gets to do something here. And then we get probably one of the best scenes of the fight where Vegeta catches Mjolnir and falls straight down into the water. Then because Thor did one thing, Vegeta decides, oh shit, gotta bust out the Ultra Ego for this guy. And he just continues to kick the shit out of Thor until Thor goes Warrior's Madness. Then there's a pretty cool Dragon Ball action sequence and Thor hits Vegeta for maybe the second time in this entire fight, not counting the hits and Ultra Ego that Vegeta allowed Thor to do, because that's basically just Vegeta powering himself up. Vegeta then decides, oh, Final Flash time, and for some reason the Final Flash goes from these two effects to these two? Why is that one pitch black? That looks distracting as hell. Though not as distracting as Thor's limp, "Feel Heaven's Wrath" shout with all the energy and ferocity of a garden gnome, and he fires the weakest God Blast of all time that can't even char the mountainside. I know people defend this episode almost religiously whenever people say it wasn't destructive enough, and to some extent I agree. I get that they wouldn't nuke the Earth, and you know, I did complain about that, but they explained it, and I thought, you know what, that makes sense. I can see why they wouldn't be so destructive as to annihilate the planet they love. But pack it in, they could have destroyed at least a speck of dust on the mountain. Oh, and I've heard people try to justify this by saying this was not the God Blast, this was just a big lightning strike. Which I think is even worse, because that means that Thor was never even bothered to use his strongest attack on Vegeta. Vegeta was so weak and pathetic that he didn't even warrant Thor ever pulling out his best stuff. He just killed Vegeta with his average fucking robber kit, the stuff he uses to deal with small-time robbers and jaywalkers. And really, that's my big problem in a nutshell. As a huge fan of Thor, with him being amongst my favorite superheroes of all time, this is just disappointing as hell. The previous two death battles gave Thor plenty to do. He was throwing hands, he was doing shit. Here he just gets thrashed by Vegeta. It's literally the opposite of Vegeta vs Shadow, where Vegeta gets thrashed all fight and then wins. But see, Vegeta vs Shadow was done as a joke. It's a very comedy-focused episode. There's no joke here, unless you count Thor. I wanted to see Thor vs Vegeta. Well, no, I didn't, but when the episode was announced, I at least wanted to see the two throwing hands. But instead, what I got was Vegeta wailing on Thor until Thor got hit with something that actually affected him and decided, "Whoa, mate, you actually minorly injured me, time to die." And no, people, I'm not asking for Thor to bust out all of his hacks and abilities for the fight. Because, frankly, I don't need to see Thor undoing Vegeta's molecules. I don't see how you're going to get much of a fight after that. I just want to see him matching Vegeta, because this episode basically has base Vegeta effortlessly dodging Thor and only getting hit once while pelting him, then Blue Evolved Vegeta beating Thor like his own son, and then getting duped once and unharmed, then Ultra Ego Vegeta using Thor as a sandbag until Thor decides actually he's going to try a little bit. Of course, you might be thinking, why is this episode above the others if I have this problem? Well, there are definitely positives. Starting with the music, with the exception of Strongest Alive, every episode previously on this list has had a lackluster and boring music. But Princess of Pride is excellent Viking metal and I can't get enough of it. Complementing that is what visually has to be one of the best looking Sprite episodes in the entire season, if not the best. The vibrancy of the colors, the brightness of the effects, Vegeta's aura in all forms, the hand-drawn segments, this episode looks incredible. I don't think any other Sprite episode this season, in my opinion, looks as good as this. The environment is incredibly rendered. The sprites look really well integrated with the scant exception of Vegeta lying on the grass. And aside from Thor keeping a chunk of Mjolnir on his leg at the start, the sprite work in general is really solid. The voice acting is also solid. Thor is kind of just fine, I have no strong opinions, I just think the aim for the headline is cringe and the Fear Evans wrath line is badly delivered. But Lanny does his best as Vegeta, and he is the definitive Vegeta for me. He sounds amazing in this episode, with every scream and shout being incredible. While I don't like that literally every single one of his lines once the fight starts other than this are references to other things, most of which feel like they're just filling space and don't sound cool at all, Lanny at least delivers them all well. And the one reference I do like, the all you will feel is oblivion, is delivered with a venom and a harshness that is chillingly badass. Vegeta's scream when he keeps on trying to kill Thor after his final flash fails is also really good. From a presentation standpoint, this episode is amazing. But everything to me under the skin deep presentation is badly choreographed and poorly paced. It does not give me what I wanted and just disappoints. And I'm someone who came in with literally the lowest expectation possible of, I just want to see the two fight. And somehow it disappointed me even with those expectations. Least favorite scene then, probably just Blue Vegeta pummeling Thor around or Ultra Ego doing that. Either is just another boring sequence. This is like a 1 minute melee, but Thor never gets to hold a combo ball for some reason. My favorite scene is the one that I've intentionally been avoiding. The final flash. This is one of the best scenes in the entire season. Lanny's final flash scream is one of the best deliveries in the season, continuing the trend of Dragon Ball characters having incredible shouts for their iconic moves. And the effects are all stunning, with Thor getting aimed at right in the head and it eclipsing his everything after. Spanning beyond the scope of the entire planet, this is an amazing shot and it looks beautiful. I can't get enough of it. This is like peak death battle. This is awesome.
What was that? Oh, right.
Shazoo!
At some point I'm going to be able to stop saying this episode is technically good, but it's boring to me. And that point is the episode after this one. Black Adam vs. Apocalypse is technically good, but it's boring to me. The analysis just does not do much for me. I don't think it has any really problems. I think Black Adam's is fine, it just doesn't do much. And they did admittedly tackle things I love about Black Adam the most. They delved into his unique morality and nature, they dissected who he is as a person, I appreciate that. I just didn't find any of the jokes all that amusing, Shazoo notwithstanding. Apocalypse is also there, and I forgot about it the moment it ended. The fight doesn't have any big problems to it for the most part, like the previous episodes did. There's no major pacing problems, no major choreography problems, no poor characterization, and it did in fact have the two combatants in it. From the start, I think the presentation is interesting, in a mostly good way. I don't like the way the comic panel at the end is cracked like that, there's just something about that feels off for this matchup. But I think the comic presentation at the start is neat, and the general setup of Apocalypse evading conduct was a case of the fight writing itself. Admittedly, the start of the battle is pretty weak, Adam and Apocalypse charge into punch, and then next shot, abruptly, Apocalypse is not only using the other hand to hold Adam's other hand instead of what they just did, but he just sort of casually blocks Adam's punches and it's super gimp. But aside from that, the action's pretty good. Adam's Shazam shout is strong and powerful. I like his evil laugh after he hits Apocalypse with the lightning, and it's surprised when Apocalypse hits him back. The action sequence is pretty cool for how short it is, and then Adam gets told by Zahudi to violate Apocalypse Marvel Comics X-Men. His arm then stretches out to twice its length to do this, and the next shot he goes from punching through Apocalypse's whole body to his arm being there, which is weird. But the fight generally picks up and becomes truly epic here. Adam gets ganged up on by robots, which looks a bit silly, but Apocalypse gets a really cool line and Adam counters with an even cooler one. I also like the two knowing each other's names, because Apocalypse can read Adam's mind and Adam is told by Zahudi, that's cool. The cut from Adam shitting himself violently with the ring to getting ready to fight Apocalypse is super abrupt though, and I thought something was cut, but based on the storyboards this is how it was meant to be. So maybe next time, don't do that, because it's super awkward how he goes from screaming covered in yellow aura, exploding things, to just sort of sitting there without the aura in front of Apocalypse waiting for a fight. A fight that is really cool, and the impact of the moon exploding in the background is stunning. I know people get pissy that all Adam did with his ring is make a lightning tiger, but from what I know, that's actually all Adam has ever done with it. So for the animation, I'm okay with just that. Plus, the tiger nearly instantly stomps Apocalypse and is really cool. I like how it pushes him past his own robots, exploding them and allowing Apocalypse to absorb them to grow giant. And this giant Apocalypse is one of the coolest things in the entire season. Both Apocalypse being so daunting and imposing in the background of this fucking amazing shot that gives such an incredible sense of scale, and in Black Adam's unflinching threat in the face of this giant. Yeah, it's weird that Apocalypse suddenly goes from maybe a block away from Adam to now a mile away, but fuck you, this is awesome. I do wish Adam got to do something here, but the big Lucario kinda just puts him down with one punch. The punch is pretty cool though, and it has a ton of impact, but somehow not as much as impact as just Apocalypse pulling his fist out of the ground. That's incredible. Here, however, is when we get to my most major problem. Adam gets knocked down, and he just stays down. Despite them making a huge deal of how Adam is a guy you can knock over as much as you want, but he'll never stay down, he just sort of sits there. He does a Shazam shout, and it's really weak. Not the shout itself, it's fine, if a bit too guttural, but the lightning is really low impact, with a minimal sound effect, and Apocalypse just grunts like he finally packed out a steamer that had kept him constipated for the past weekend. Then Apocalypse raises his foot, and Adam goes for a Shazam shout, and stops. Why? This is so stupid, why does he just stop? Yes, I've heard the argument here. Apocalypse absorbed the living lightning, so it couldn't come down. Here's the problem. Why the fuck does that mean Adam should stop his shout? He doesn't fucking know that the entire living lightning was absorbed, and clearly it wasn't, because if it was, then Apocalypse wouldn't have been vaporized by it. And also, if the living lightning was in Apocalypse instead of Adam, how would Adam stay as Black Adam and not be Teth Adam? If the intention was that the living lightning was absorbed, then Adam should have said Shazam, and then nothing happened. Then tried again, and then said oh shit when he actually realized it was absorbed. Because here it looks like he just gave up to do a quirky. And, you could assume, Zahuti told him the lightning was gone. Except if Zahuti told him the lightning was gone, then the lightning would still be in him, because that's what gives him access to the wisdom of Zahuti. So, that doesn't make sense either. The death itself is mostly fine. Apocalypse does his legit litness jig, but I cannot take this face seriously. It just looks goofy. I know, if your face was mashed like a bottle of red hair dye, your face would look fucked up. But this looks downright silly. Anyway, Apocalypse obliterating him with his own lightning with the reference to the one good thing in the entirety of the Apocalypse movie, and the laugh is cool. It's a fittingly dark and dour ending given who these two are. So I guess what I said earlier isn't actually true. Apocalypse vs. Black Adam is not boring, it's actually pretty good. It's just one of the less interesting episodes this season. While on a choreography and animation standpoint it's pretty good, it doesn't really stand out for the most part aside from this shot of Apocalypse. I don't like Adam just taking his death lying down, and honestly it's weird how they got this never go down attitude right with Vegeta, but not with Black Adam. But hey, it's not the end of the world, ironically. This episode is certainly fine. My least favorite shot is obviously the Shazam oh shit, and my favorite is obviously Apocalypse. That should all go without saying. Oh, but the It's Still Lightning line is alone better than every episode prior to this, don't at me.
That's a nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
Oh, is this happening? Is this actually happening? You want a calc off, big guy?
Now this is the good shit, bruv. Raiden vs. Excalibur might be a bonus episode, but it's amazing. In fact, being a bonus episode, it lets us stand it even more, because it has such an unconventional setup. Hands down, my favorite analysis of the entire season, probably. Starting with fucking lo-fi girl Jocelyn and Wiz just on his makeshift computer that we can infer is broken a ton because of Boomstick, walked in on by Boomstick in a nightcap that he's wearing on top of his existing cap is just a great starting point. Though the light in the model looks really weird here, the idea that Boomstick sometimes wakes up in the workplace with no idea how he got there is just kind of amusing. I really like the setup in general, with Boomstick pushing Wiz to tell him about his favorite Warframe, which I can attest is a thing friends do, ask about favorites, and then he jumps to conclusions and comes with Raiden. So Excalibur's analysis is sort of set up as just Wiz explaining to Boomstick what's up with the lore of Excalibur, his weaponry and all that, and Boomstick is just reacting to what Wiz is saying. Even the feats for Excalibur aren't like calculations or anything, it's just like he's saying some things like Excalibur survived. Boomstick then brings up Raiden, and Wiz just indulges him because Boomstick noted connections to Excalibur. The entire analysis is just fun as hell, especially when they're in their calc-off phase and have a go at each other during that. It's a ton of fun, I would love more like it, but I get that's probably just a bonus episode thing. So yeah, I'd like more bonus episodes, please. Hell, I like how they start the fight. It's even Wiz who brings up that they have to fight now, showing that, yeah, he's the composed one, but he's still a fan of versus debating, he likes his job, and so they have the fight animation. And the animation, while lacking in a lot of things like characterization, story, and frankly choreography for the most part, is just high-octane fun. The two do shit like blitz blaze at each other while bouncing a throwing star back and forth. Excalibur stops one bullet by slicing it 7 vigintillion times over for no reason. Wiz and Boomstick actively interrupt the fight, where Boomstick even gets his second W over Wiz in the episode, and it ends with a high-octane stabby bit that leads to the death. Yeah, it's nothing technically special, and a lot of the action is just mindless swing with effects, the two bouncing around from a distance is just streaks, or just things happening with these speed lines around the corners, but it's still fun. Yeah, there are problems. I hear Raiden's line in Ripper mode is super out of place and just a reference, which it does feel weird. He immediately drops his tether to Excalibur at the end and just swing back and forth like this. Excalibur explodes, but is thrown towards the epicenter of the explosion, and in general, not much that happens is actually memorable, but given what was likely a much shorter production time to most episodes, and this being only animated by one guy, I think it came out really well and really fun. It's basically like a 3D 1-minute melee that's 3 minutes long, if that makes sense. And I think the ending of Excalibur freezing Raiden's sword over is really cool. Even if the death itself is one of the weakest in this season, with just Excalibur dashing past and cutting Raiden in half. And the sword being frozen apparently just didn't matter because it's still in one piece at the end. And then a Warframe just walks up, which is out of place and definitely not confusing at all. But hey, the fight in totality is just really solid, and any problems I have with the ending is immediately brushed over with a very fun conclusion. Of course, it's weird that Wiz says that a giant asteroid has to be as big as a dinosaur-killing explosion, but still, it's a fun conclusion that carries the same vibes as the rest of the episode. The episode is peak Wiz and Boomstick, and I'm all for it. I want more like it. It's just fun and kind of what I wish Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man was, but let's not bring that episode up. This is a solid episode, and my least favorite scene is literally just Excalibur cuts a box while dabbing, but the explosion sends him in the wrong direction. He should have gone flying to the other side of the building. My favorite is right before that. It's Wiz and Boomstick interrupting the fight. That's just funny as shit.
If you ain't got a reason why you hate clowns, I'm gonna kill your whole fucking family. Alright, now get your fucking ass out the car! Come on!
Last season premieres was one of my favorite episodes of the season, and while this season's wasn't as high up, I still really like Harley Quinn vs. Jinx. Now, it's not as good in some regards as the previous episode I mentioned. I don't really like either's analysis all that much. Harley's is fine, I don't mind most of it, though Ringmaster's interruption wasn't really that fun to me, which I say is one of those people who actually likes Ringmaster. The best part honestly was this panel of Batman saying a slur, or maybe Harley in fact lifting the whole tree off the ground, so there are at least moments I found enjoyable. Jinx's has only gotten worse with time. It's not even the episode's fault, it's just the reaction of people. At this point, I didn't even care about Ringmaster advertising League of Legends the way he does. If Scarletana made me love Zatanna, this episode made me dislike Jinx and never want to watch Arcane. Of course, the difference here is that this episode is actually really fucking good, with what happens to be one of the best looking 3D episodes in Death Battle history. With almost no jank, fantastic choreography, and considering how annoying these two characters can be, relatively minimal annoyance from the characters. In fact, characterization is surprisingly strong in parts of this episode. Jinx laughing about the dynamite in her mouth and also facilitating its ignition, Harley talking to Jinx's weapon as if it was a person, and Jinx actually complying by making it look sad when Harley berates it. The fact that Jinx fucking goes out of her way to keep the dynamite in her mouth when she could spit it out at any point. The only time they got on my nerves was Harley randomly pulling out these glasses and pausing the flow of the fight. I don't know, the actual joke is good with Jinx complying, but this took me out of it briefly. But it was definitely briefly, because the rest of the fight is just fun. From the start to the end, the animation is fluid, choreography is great, and while Harley's model can look a bit odd to me at points, especially next to Jinx, I think the fight looks fantastic. It has some decent sight gags, it has a fun use of their varied arsenals, and I can't stress enough how much I love this shot of Jinx flying out of the exploding carousel, riding a fucking missile launcher, and then dropping down carefree. This shot alone sold me on Jinx as a character more than their entire analysis. This is great. The two fighting while teleporting is fun. I can't get over the fact that the device teleported the entire fucking roller coaster with them, which sort of makes me imagine Blake and Mikasa pausing as an entire fucking structure they've never seen before shows up and vanishes immediately, because they show up in the back. The Looney Tunes-esque bit is a tad off, even for these two, it feels a bit too cartoony, but I'll live. They fall into a mirror maze and we get maybe the coolest thing ever, with the Joker Venom making Jinx just go nuts. The amazing hand-drawn elements combined with the 3D to make for a truly stunning ending, with Jinx gone wild, grabbing the camera and shooting it, while Harley tries to go psychoanalyst, but Jinx getting this really cool line that I think is just delivered perfectly, and gunning Harley down with stylistic flower petals. The fight then ends back where it started, and we get a callback to Joker vs. Sweet Tooth. That's almost a shot at the ending of that episode, with Harley trying to do what Joker did, but then just dying. I can't sing the praises of this episode enough, because it doesn't really have any flaws. At least not many that are big. Even some of the episodes that I prefer over this episode have more flaws that I can point out. This one has 2 bits I'm not a fan of, and that's all. In the animation at least. I said my piece in the analysis, but the animation is stunningly good. Way better than I ever expected, and it really does a good job of being the only Harley and Jinx media I will ever plan to consume in the future. My least favorite scene is Blake vs. Mikasa, and my favorite is the Joker Venom bit. Moving along.
Who the heck is Raymond and why did anyone care?
For the episode I was most interested in going into from the season 9 reveals we go at the end of last season, Tanjiro vs. Jonathan Joestar matched my expectations and then some. I was very interested to see how they would tackle Jonathan, to the point where, yeah, I don't really care about Tanjiro's analysis too much. It's good aside from the Pickle Rick reference, but it doesn't really feel like they covered much of his story. I mean, maybe, but I imagine that's due to anime spoilers. Jonathan's, however, was pretty decent, well, aside from the nickel line, and the reference to Wim Hof, whose methods have led to at least 5 people's death, and has been pretty thoroughly disproven by multiple studies. Aside from those things, the analysis was really fun. I like how they tackled Jonathan, given Jonathan's limited presence in the overall franchise, and now he doesn't really have a lot of screen time. I will say though, this black box should absolutely not have been a black box. It should have been in the episode to justify the faster than light scaling Dio gave Jonathan. But the ending was great, I loved it. Well, the Ribble Dick thing wasn't that funny, but the Bloodline thing and his sacrifice were handled in just a really good way that makes me smile. The fight too was excellent. While I won't deny that Jonathan using his sword so much is a little bit unorthodox for a Jonathan fight, he does have it and I can't accept it for this. Because when he does use his fist in this fight, it's generally good. Now the fight isn't perfect, I think Tanjiro's effects normally look great, but here they're literally not animated at all, which is pretty bad compared to everything else he does being beautifully animated. And Jonathan's rapid fire punches at the start are super awkward, with his motionless body fucking tweening across the ground, and his fists aren't even punching. His arms are just gyrating back and forth while fist effects go over the top of them. And of course, there's the ending, which is a mixed bag. The rest of the animation though is very solid. The start is fine, but Jonathan here and for the entirety of the fight is ridden with the exact pompous pontification that is Jonathan's everything. Tanjiro immediately disarming Jonathan goes to show his superior skill with a blade, but then Jonathan immediately goes to punches that Tanjiro is visibly unsure of how to deal with, which goes to show Jonathan's superior fisting power. The zoom punch is just a great inclusion as well. I also love that Jonathan's solution to Tanjiro coming at him from behind isn't to block with his sword, but to fucking punch Tanjiro's sword. And even when stabbed, he just punt kicks the kid. And he fucking swings a tree. But yeah, none of this so far will be enough to put the episode this high. It's everything after that really carries it. The clash of blades and the character interaction, where the swords very much aren't making contact. But the Scarlet Overdrive, Tanjiro seeing how Jonathan is breathing for his techniques and deciding, yes, this means I should attack his lungs, because that's something that would only be a good strategy against someone else who breathed. It's so stupid, but in a way that feels very JoJo. This whole sequence with Tanjiro going ham is excellent, and Jonathan freaking out that Tanjiro is going for his neck and somehow coming to the conclusion, he's trying to decapitate me, he must know that I'm breathing, is just fucking such a JoJo's conclusion to come to. Though I don't like how Tanjiro is just slowly attacking Jonathan's unmoving sword. I can forgive it though, because Jonathan's Metal Silver Overdrive is amazing, as is everything after, with Tanjiro shattering Jonathan's sword, and Jonathan jumping back just to try and give himself some ground to work with. The line that shows up here is apparently a Demon Slayer thing, which is cool, and goes hand in hand with the sudden color palette change, which is definitely a JoJo's thing. And Jonathan's internal monologue when he realizes Tanjiro wasn't going for his neck, but was actually setting him up to go for his lungs, is just great. Jonathan being stabbed and his fucking shriek of pain when the fire dragon explodes out through his whole body is amazing. And him having used the time of that monologue to dodge a whole 2 inches is painfully JoJo. Stupidly JoJo. Jonathan breathes and channels Hamon through Tanjiro's sword, which leads to a fucking stunning Sunlight Yellow Overdrive, which steals the show. The entire sequence of events is amazing. I love the writing, animation, choreography, just how much it feels like an ending to a JoJo Part 1 fight. It's great, with even Jonathan's pose being pretty well done. Then there's the ending, which I appreciate, but it has some problems that just take away from it for me. Tanjiro saying she's my sister and that ending it really just makes him look like a fucking moron for not saying that literally immediately. And the cartoony tears I just can't take seriously. This does not do it for me. It makes me laugh, and I can't laugh and then feel bad after. That's just not something I can do. At least no one is presented like this. There's a reason Luke didn't have cartoon tears when he took off his dad's helmet, or Trunks didn't have goofy haha tears when Vegeta sacrificed himself. I like the peaceful painless death though, it feels just like Jonathan to do, and the ambiguous ending of why Nezuko hesitated is also good. Then there's a conclusion which, yeah, that's fine. What really elevates the fight to me though, more than anything else, is the music. Breathless Blades probably isn't my favourite track this season, but I don't think any episode this season has a track that works as well for the fight as this, except for maybe one other that I'll mention later. The way the music swells when Jonathan has his comeback after being stabbed is so fucking good. It works so well, as does the Sono Chino Sadame notes I play every now and again. It really works. Also, I like that Jonathan just has the sword in his chest all the way to the end, that's funny. My least favorite part of this fight has to be Jonathan just standing there while Tanjiro swings at his sword, but my favorite is easily the Sunlight Yellow Overdrive. The entire sequence is amazing, but the Dragon Stab to Overdrive is my favorite part, especially because Jonathan has one of my favorite vocal performances of the entire season, along with Omni-Man, Sauron, and Vegeta, who all did incredible as well.
Sponge Pants, Square Bob, he's a friendly little guy. Is that it? Am I close?
No.
Damn it.
You'd be stunned at how many people think I hate SpongeBob SquarePants versus Super Friends Aquaman, but I don't. It's up this high for a very good reason. I don't dislike the episode at all. I think it's a fun, entertaining, and unique episode. I don't love the analysis, the fight, or even the whole episode as much as a lot of people, but that's simply because I'm not someone with the experience with SpongeBob. And despite what my comments would say, I'm not of the opinion that I deserve to be lynched because of that. The most alarming thing with this episode was the reaction I got from my review. Some people were fine, but some people were of the opinion that I was doing something objectively wrong because I watched the episode without context or knowledge of SpongeBob. Here are a few things I want to clear up right before I talk about the episode. 1. There's nothing wrong with me not having watched SpongeBob. There are many episodes of Death Battle where I have not experienced the home series of one of the characters. Fucking Samurai Jack vs Afro Samurai is one of my favorite episodes of all time, and I haven't seen either show, though I do plan to. 2. I do not need to go watch SpongeBob to make the episode better. If anything, you are telling me the episode is not good enough for anyone who hasn't watched other things. Not only do I disagree with that from a standpoint of thinking that an episode of Death Battle should be able to stand alone, without you needing to be a fan of either series, but I also disagree with the notion that the episode needs me to watch SpongeBob to be good, because I think it's a good episode regardless. 3. There are countless people who watch SpongeBob and have made reviews, comments, reactions, and so on about the episode, praising it as the greatest episode of all time. Is it so wrong that just one person gives a review without a predisposed liking towards one of the combatants? Shouldn't fans of the episode be more impressed by the fact that I like the episode as much as I do, despite not being a fan of SpongeBob? And 4, why the fuck is the SpongeBob community this fucking toxic and agonizing to go through? Way to fucking attack my character over this shit. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the actual episode. The analysis does not hit me as well as it does everyone else, but I don't dislike it. I think it went for something different at most, and I can always appreciate that even in episodes I don't like. But the moment Wiz talked about SpongeBob turning the world, I knew exactly what this episode was going to be. Wiz thinks SpongeBob sucks, but he doesn't. Wiz thinks Aquaman doesn't suck, but he does. Lo and behold, that's exactly what the episode was. And for the most part, it wasn't that funny to me. SpongeBob's analysis had maybe a few jokes I enjoyed, but that's about it. Somehow Aquaman's was far more enjoyable to me because the jokes just made me laugh more. At least I like the delivery from Wiz more. While I like the desperation of Wiz to see how far the SpongeBob rabbit hole goes, I find his desperation to find anything for Aquaman better. And I think the constant moments where Wiz says something lame and then tries to turn it into something positive is just more entertaining. The fight too I think is quite good. Though I am aware that not watching SpongeBob leaves me lost on a few things, there are quite a few references to SpongeBob SquarePants that I just don't get. I'm not completely lost, I do know of the guy who narrates the things, and the bob of doodles and the hyper-realism, but that's about it. The fight manages to capture a decent balance of comedy and sometimes even really cool action, though it's not without its faults and pacing problems. I think it's a really good gag episode. Highlights to me personally include Aquaman's punches doing absolutely fucking nothing at the start, the bubble missile not blowing up immediately but actually punching Aquaman in the stomach before hitting him and sending him flying, and hyper-realistic Aquaman. Those are all great moments, and I think they made the ending go very hard for no goddamn reason. Apparently SpongeBob not being recognized as a hero is actually a big part of his character, and that's the only thing the comment section told me about without trying to kill me over, so that's cool to know. This all does make a bit more sense now with SpongeBob understanding Aquaman's plight. At the same time, the pacing is a bit weird to me. Aquaman just decides for some reason to run up and stab SpongeBob, I guess because SpongeBob is full of all that water. But Aquaman could have survived the rest of that hour just fine, and SpongeBob seemed to be giving him support there. He would have just put the ocean back. It is a little bit abrupt how Aquaman goes from just assuming SpongeBob is an evildoer and then changing his mind. But given how shaky his grounds are for thinking SpongeBob is an evildoer in the first place, it's not that bad. What is a bit more bothersome is all the portals. I don't get it. I've not seen a good explanation, with some even saying it's a fucking Rick and Morty reference, which... why? It's weird, and I'm not sure it was entirely necessary. He could have figured out the mind control thing on his own, and with them showing that SpongeBob can launch out of the panel of his own comics, something with that probably should have been done. But as it stands, those portals now, they show up in the first half and then vanish with no explanation. I guess to give Aquaman a trident? Again, you could have just had SpongeBob knock him out of the panel, and then he could just grab another Aquaman's trident on another page and use that to lever himself back towards the animation. I don't know, it just feels like that would have been better to me. Still, there's minimal to complain about with the actual quality of the episode. Aside from Aquaman's regrowing arm and the door that's not quite in reality right, the animation is technically pretty flawless, with fluid rigging, really good squash and stretch on SpongeBob, and good effects that are cartoony and silly to match the tone of the fight. The stock nuclear explosion was probably a reference, but to me, I think it's just funny without context. And hyper-realistic Aquaman is maybe one of my favorite jokes in the entire season. It's that of the Calc-Off in Scarlet vs. Raiden. The fight didn't sugarcoat the stomp, but I think it did it pretty well. Aquaman gets plastered for the entirety of the start of the fight, which plays into his realization that he sucks. And then once he and SpongeBob are smiling and friendly, they just keep fighting for the fun of it, with SpongeBob not stomping his ass because he's not really trying to. He only kills him when he goes a bit too far. To which I have to say, Aquaman's a fucking villain for basically killing all sea life on the planet, and likely all land life as well, so good job Arthur, you succeeded in being a bigger villain than the entire Legion of Doom. SpongeBob then draws Aquaman a grave, which I think is pretty cool, and a nice character moment. Even if I can't really feel sad for fucking Super Friends Aquaman. Also, they included both That's Right Boomstick and this was an incredibly close match, so that's pretty cool. My least favourite scene is kind of hard to pin down, there aren't many bad ones, it might be the weird door, but my favourite is obviously hyper-realistic Aquaman.
It worked! My time machine worked!
Ew, I stepped in loser.
There's something amusing about how a lot of my love for Trunks vs. Silver comes from how well it matches the style of Xenoverse, but at the same time, I think Trunks' analysis is fucking lame. It's not awful or anything, it's good to have a breath of fresh air amongst Dragon Ball analyses, But holy hell, do we really need 3 different "this thing is similar to this other pop culture thing, so here's a reference for you" joke? They're not funny and they're boring. I would have taken just having a painfully unfunny cutaway gag here, because Trunks' analysis is not very interesting, but hey, at least it covers something new for Dragon Ball. Silver's is better. I'm not super invested, but it was entertaining enough, and we've only gotten Anji once before, so this was pretty cool. But let's be real, we're here to talk about the fight. This is an episode where that takes precedent more than any other, because holy fuck, this is the most hype-inducing fight of the season, and it's not even close to me. There are episodes that I prefer, but none make me feel the hype quite as much as this one. At least in terms of high-speed action in the Dragon Ball style, with the closest we've gotten to pure Dragon Ball since Goku vs Superman or maybe Kirby vs Boo. There are some incredibly fast combos thrown out by Trunks and constant beam blasts. For a 3-minute animation, it's impressive how many techniques from Trunks they were able to fit in. Trunks throws out the Masenko, Burning Attack, Gallic Gun, Final Flash, Eternal Time Labyrinth, and brings in the Kamehameha by Goku and Pan as well. Sure, 3 of those moves are just beams, but it's cool to see them all. It feels like a Xenoverse fight, where most of the time, you throw out a combo then chain it into a big fuck off laser of some kind. I also think the dynamic with Silver was handled really well. Whenever Trunks gets up close, Silver is very clearly overwhelmed and put on the back foot. But from a distance, Silver is able to funnel Trunks' attacks back at him. He throws most of the moon at him, he hits him with his own Spirit Sword. It has a fun distance dynamic where those beam attacks that Trunks loves to spam are almost his own enemy, but whenever he actually does land one, it feels super impactful, with the Burning Attack sending Silver flying to the moon, and the Final Flash just being fucking awesome. Is it as awesome as Vegeta's? No, obviously not, but it's still really great. And I love the idea that the color change is because Silver tried to redirect the Final Flash too, but this time it was too much for him and he just fucking got overwhelmed. Trunks also has some pretty amusing character moments. The crap baskets was a funny little reference that didn't take me out of anything too much, and the card pull was something I didn't expect but was happy to see. Especially because it justifies Trunks going for a beam attack again. The first one failed, but he assumes Silver can't redirect 3 at once and tries to overpower him. And it also shows that Trunks learns from the Masenko, because this time he's actually ready for Silver when he throws the beam back at him. But then Silver manages to overpower him with the combined beams of Goku and Pan. But then Trunks overpowers him back with the fucking amazing God transformation, giving us the rare Super Saiyan God moment on Death Battle. It's fucking badass that how it just overwhelms Silver. All the way to the end. He throws him around, he overpowers his energy misdirection, he summons the Key Sword and nearly kills Silver there and then until they hit each other with their finishes. And Silver doesn't even attempt to redirect Trunks' sword. He has to teleport it away so it flies back at him from behind. And even that isn't enough to put God Trunks down. Silver has to then hit Trunks again with his full psychokinetic power to get the job done. This episode really sells the overwhelming power of Super Saiyan God. Silver has to pull out all stops to put him down and even hit him with his own finishing move. It's so refreshing also to have Silver not be treated like a joke. In this battle he is a complete badass, but not at the cost of his dorkish characterization. His response to being arrested and his dopey "I don't think we're in Mobius anymore" line are just so characterful. Trunks meanwhile gets to be a total fucking badass as well, with his own moments with the dorkiness too, like the card pull and the crap baskets line, while also getting out the amazing end of your future delivery from Kaiser. Seriously though, we needed a Final Flash shout because that would have completed my life. Right, we can't pretend this battle is flawless. The opening sword barrage is very jank, the super transformations are abrupt and weird, especially with everything to do with this rock. There's no Final Flash shout, and also Trunks, why did you just kill hundreds of people? But personally, I think there's so much packed into a short span of time that I don't really care. This episode does so much right for me and hits me where I wanted it to. Obviously, like all Sprite episodes this season, it looks really good, with incredible effects all around, but especially the Time Labyrinth, which looks stunning. There's tons of references in the crystals, and all the chains and shit look amazing. I fucking love this animation of the Key Sword spinning around. The combination of Spirit Sword into Keyblade is amazing too, and it almost justifies how Silver was able to affect the sword despite its resistances, because Silver affected the Spirit Sword, and as a result the Keyblade within it. God, I love this fight, it's so good, and it's followed by what I consider to be a very thorough and effective conclusion. Except they do kind of go a bit overboard on damage control by just constantly reassuring you that no, Trunks is really cool, okay? We're not biased against him. We know you're not biased against him, and the people who think you're biased against him aren't going to be convinced. Worst scene is so hard for me, but it's probably Trunks killing all those people in that building for no apparent reason. But my favorite has to be the God Trunks transformation. From the progression of 3 beams fight at Silver, to Silver redirecting them, to Trunks straining to hold his own back, to Silver straining to throw Goku and Pans into him as well, to Trunks' sword breaking and him overpowering the beam with his whole body. It's just all so good.
As a matter of fact, I've got a knack for licking old cunts. Ooh.
James Bond vs. John Wick remains a surprisingly good, very grounded, and unique episode. We don't get many down-to-earth human brawls, so when we do get them, it's really fun and out there. It's not as good as Snake vs. Sam, obviously, but it's still a very good episode. The analysis is actually pretty fun, talking about the actual martial arts Keanu Reeves had to imitate for Wick sequences. It was a really unique way to look at that, and the analysis focused on the big advantages they have over their opponent for the analysis too. Bonds focuses on his gadgets and Wick on his tenacity. They're not perfect. Well, okay, Bonds I think has very few problems with it, but Wick's does have some minor pacing issues. I find it weird that they talk about the whole dog killing, car stealing thing early on, and then later they reiterate the same point. I guess that's the result of making an analysis on a character with 3 movies and a few comics, compared to someone who has one of the most extensive libraries of media of any combatant in Death Battle history. However, I think it would have come off a bit better if they had left what exactly that big fucking mistake was at the start, you know? They just sort of didn't tell you what the mistake was, and then they brought it back later as a sort of Chekhov's gun. It's not enough to ruin the analysis at all. I think they both focused on what I wanted, the jokes weren't distractingly unfunny, the emphasis was placed on all the right places for the characters, the lack of calcs was acceptable and made more sense here because not having them highlights of these two are fundamentally human at their core, and seeing the comparison of Bond, who has all these gadgets disguised as regular utensils, versus Wick, who is the guy who kills people with regular utensils, was neat too. Okay, I said utensils like twice, utensils. But most of all for this episode, I really love the fight. It goes for a very solid vibe, and it's not perfect. There are still moments like the really weird walk cycle for Bond, and the very janky and badly animated opening sequence of the action, but most of it is really solid. The characters are written perfectly. Bond has this smug arrogance that is a joy to watch, while Wick is quite serious. Instead of the usual dynamic of serious guy gets annoyed by goofy guy, it never really comes out like the other, serious versus comedic character dynamics. Because Bond is someone who regularly gets serious, and when he does, he still gets to be smug to show his character. I just like that Wick is completely unshaken by Bond's attitude. Like, he's seen it all before, he knows for a fact this guy is just going to be another corpse. While Bond also is unshaken by Wick's reputation because he's seen it all before, he knows for a fact this guy is just going to be another mission added to his record. It's a really cool dynamic, and there are some genuinely really good lines across this all. Bond's Baba Yaga line and Wick's MI6 lines do a similar thing to Snake vs. Sam, where it builds this world to an extent. It's not like these two magically showed up in the same universe one day. It really feels like these two always existed in this world and they just never encountered each other. Wick looks to his side and he already knows who Bond is, while Bond is established from the start to be on a mission to take Wick down. They're fully aware of who the other is and where they're from, and it can even imply that the reason Bond decided to face Wick in the Continental is because his license to kill gives him permission to execute Bond on company grounds, while Wick doesn't have that permission himself. And Bond just is not aware that Wick is the kind of guy who will ignore the rules of the Continental to survive. The line where Bond says "lucky me" in response to Wick telling him about the rules at least implies that he considers his license to kill of higher authority than the High Council. The action as well, it's really well done. It's not perfect, as I said, this sequence, while good in concept, is really slow, awkward, and has no impact. And I still really wish that when their bullets collided, Bond split into multiple, like the shotgun bullet that they talked about in the analysis. But once Bond gets his rocket loogie ready, it's all systems go. Wick tackling Bond before he gets a chance to shoot his gun again is very John Wick, and the entire sequence with the big suplex is great. I'm not big on Bond using the laser watch here because, while I know this was done to set up that he has it for the kill, so it doesn't seem like it comes out of nowhere, it kind of defeats the purpose of Wick would never see it coming. If he knows that, it's there. Of course I'm not terribly bothered, because it does go right into the combination of Wick killing people with anything including a pencil, and Bond having an exploding pencil, which is a genius combination of attributes and I love it. Especially because Wick has no weapons here, he just reaches in to find anything and doesn't hesitate to try and kill with it. Now, Wick kinda just standing there when the pen lands as if he knows it's an exploding pen is a bit weird, because again, the point they're trying to make with this episode is that Wick would not see Bond's gadgets coming, so from his point of view, he randomly stops to stare at a pen that fell on the floor. It's a funny moment, but doesn't really fit Wick, but it definitely fits Bond. The explosion also looks kinda weird, but I can forgive it because it serves to bring the Aston Martin in, which is really cool and sets up a really cool sequence for the climax of the fight. With Bond and Wick having a knife fight while the Martin is firing its guns like crazy all over the place in a spinning time. They're ducking under it, they're getting behind cover with the pillars. This is over the top in the best yet most grounded way possible and I adore it. It feels right at home with their series. And like the rest of this fight, it does show that Wick is better at fighting in hand to hand, but he's not completely outmatching Bond at all. He gets his stab off in Bond, but Bond is still fighting back throughout this. It goes to demonstrate that Bond also isn't outmatched in the tenacity department. Wick tanking the Gatling gun fire is kinda weird, even a bulletproof suit isn't stopping that. But it does give us the fucking amazing first person view of Wick pulling out the gun and Bond turning around and firing before Wick can shoot. This is so cool on so many levels. I'll get out of the way now. This is my favorite shot of the fight. Shot. We not only get a cool reference to one of the most iconic elements of the James Bond mythos, but it also demonstrates that Bond is quicker on the draw as they later state, with how he was able to get up, aim, and fire before Wick could shoot, despite Wick aiming before Bond even turned around. It also explains why Wick never tries to shoot Bond again. Bond didn't just shoot Wick, he shot straight through the barrel of John Wick's gun out the back of it into his chest, destroying his gun at the same time. Now, how exactly Bond's gun can get through the suit when a Gatling gun couldn't, I don't know. Even shotgun-powered pistol is an outdoing minigun, but it's really cool, so I don't care. And Wick isn't completely outshone here either. Even with Bond pressing the advantage and shooting Wick twice more, he powers through it to try and kill Bond. Bond even uses this to his advantage by turning Wick into a human shield to block the Martin's weapons, and a human weapon to stop the Martin by kicking him into it. Then he shoots a chandelier and it crashes into Wick, and Wick just lets himself die. It's a bit weird that he would let himself die like that, but I'll live. Bond collapsing because he's so tired and still has that knife in him really goes to demonstrate how much this fight took out of him. Even with his pun, he's just tired while making it. The shot of Wick's phone going out is also neat. Though Q responding to Bond's pun as if he knows what happened is weird. He only just got into contact with him, he doesn't know what the pun means. Smashing is just a general term Brits use. Unless, of course, you assume that Q interpreted this pun as Bond saying, "I fucked him with my Giga Chad Sigma male sex powers and had a steamy gay smashdown." In which case, I don't know where to take this joke. I just wanted to put a "this fight ends in gay sex" joke here, because they won't give us Byakuya Togami versus Miles Edgeworth, which is a matchup where the most in-character ending would be gay sex, that they say they didn't enjoy while organizing for the next time they see each other. Oh, also the episode's conclusion is cool, and the worst scene is obviously this bit.
So in the end, the master of magnetism, a mutant with power levels rivaling that of a neutron star, my favorite growing up, and a man who can rip apart bridges with a flick of the wrist, can be brought down by the purple guy.
Some people have the opinion that I blindly hate any cape shit fight no matter what, as if I have some vendetta against Marvel or DC as franchises. That is not the case. I just think they're played out in Death Battle, and it's rare for any episode with them to truly excite me, because it all has the same sort of vibe to it. That does not apply to Magneto vs. Tetsuo. This episode stands out in all the best ways. Hell, I'm outright elated that it's so good, because it spites that subset of people in the community who would go around harassing anyone who mentions the matchup in a good light. Yeah, people did that for a while, and it was the mega cringe. Magneto is one of the most solid, concrete stories of all Marvel Comics characters, so it's unsurprising that I found his analysis actually pretty good. Telling his really cool and interesting tale, talking about his powers in a way that was actually both entertaining and also in-depth and interesting, and just in general, the analysis caught my attention and kept it there, which is something not a lot of analyses these days manage to do, which is a big plus for the episode. The transition from verses to story is sometimes seamless, like when they perfectly segue from the growing escalation of Magneto's powers to his world-destroying power back into his story and how that relates, it's great. I do feel like maybe there was some versus stuff left out, but the speed and strength feats were all there and a big deal was made of them, enough that you can't miss them. And yet they still felt seamlessly implemented, so it's more of a minor nagging vibe than an actual meaningful criticism. Magneto undoubtedly has the best Marvel DC analysis in the entire season, and to me, it's not even close. Likewise, Tetsuo's analysis is really well done. It doesn't do anything particularly noteworthy to me, at least until the version differences open up. I tend to like when Death Battle acknowledges differences between versions instead of ignoring them. The only time I don't like it is with Marvel Comics in the MCU. Okay. There are plenty of times they do it and it feels right, but there's sometimes I just like, why did you need to bring up the colors of the Infinity Stones, and stuff like that. Otherwise, when it comes to stuff like Akira and Sailor Moon, it feels natural and fitting, and it's very important that those differences are noted because they sort of paint how the general public views their stories. It completely changes things and has warped the public perception. With the MCU, it's important when they bring up things that generally are known to the public but are actually different to the comics, but sort of like irrelevant stuff doesn't need to be brought up. Tetsuo's analysis also covers the Big Bang thing decently well. I would say I would have liked more elaboration, but they put the extra elaboration into the conclusion and it doesn't actually feel cheap, so I can accept it. It's a great pair of analyses, followed up by a really solid fight. Obviously, like every other single sprite fight this season, visually it's a blast. While it does look somewhat ugly, that's the point. Neo Tokyo is a shithole. If it looked all pretty and stuff, that'd be dumb. Tetsuo sprites also look really solid. I think they're custom, and if they are, they don't have the problem that a lot of them do, where there's a lot of completely side-on 90-degree angle images. They're all angled to the camera in a way that matches Magneto sprites pretty well. Though they might not be custom, in which case, sprite work is really good with the puppet rigging. Effects are all really cool. Tetsuo's red and Magneto's purple magnet powers being distinct is great, and they both visually pop. And this episode also has some of the best hand-drawn bits in the season, with the giant mutant baby really taking the cake. Though I say all this good stuff about the visuals when the first scene of the fight has this ugly ass cape. The writing though is what makes this fight for me. It starts with just Magneto commenting on how shit Tokyo is because he's an asshole, and Tetsuo deciding, what the fuck, someone else with psychic powers in my territory? Fuck that guy, he's a boomer! Because Tetsuo's an asshole. The banter when they're fighting is all delightfully in character. Magneto calls him a child and Tetsuo gets all pissy because he's got a tiny penis. Magneto boasts about how he's the goat of magnetism, and Tetsuo doesn't like that and screams about killing the guy for very clearly kicking his ass up to this point. When Magneto loses his helmet, he gets genuinely pissed off at Tetsuo's just temperament and just growls at the kid. But the end changes it all. Tetsuo is in agony. He begs to be put down while in this disgusting form. And Magneto, being a sort of anti-heroic figure more than a villainous one nowadays, obliges. He goes from calling Tetsuo an impudent child to a poor child once he understands more about what's really going on. It's a really solemn and well-written ending. It perfectly captures the dynamic I think I wanted most for these two in the ending. The fight itself is kind of bland at the start, but at the same time, what the fuck else was it supposed to be? You have two characters who are known for throwing shit. You don't want it to start all with the immediately wacky creative stuff because it doesn't have as much impact later if you do that. So just having them throw stuff is fine, and credit where it's due, it's not that bad. The shot of Tetsuo flying past what he's about to weaponize and then being torn out and the camera panning with them back to Tetsuo is great. And the Tetsuo throwing Magneto's own attack back at him is pretty fun. Magneto cutting off Tetsuo's arm is kind of weird given he just throws random shit at him to get it done, but I'll live. Tetsuo rebuilding his arm is cool, and Magneto using the same building as a weapon twice is also just really fun. Tetsuo's anime combo is a bit odd, but it works for me, and Magneto immediately deciding, you know what, I'm going to punch this little shit right in his smug face, is great. Now remember when I said there's only one episode other than Tanjiro vs. Jonathan that has a track work for it to that level? That is this episode. The track plays anything so well, especially after this point. Ego Death is phenomenal and complements the episode perfectly, with the way the beat goes after the two clash and alter the fields of the earth and onward being excellent. Magneto's helmet flying off and shattering is given the right level of impact. And Tetsuo gradually trying to overpower Magneto's magnetic field around his head is just fucking gross but cool. And then Magneto manages to Uno reverse him, which plays well into the bit in the corner about how Magneto always has his shields up, while Tetsuo isn't doing anything like that himself. Sort of an experience difference they have. I will say I'm not a fan of how wounded the two are here and then all these wounds vanish for the rest of the fight, but that's something I didn't even notice until now after rewatching the episode countless times, so that goes to show how much of a problem that is. The surprise for Magneto when Tetsuo mutates is great, and he gets fucking pummeled and watches as several fantastic shots build up to the mutant baby reveal. As I said before, the welcome to die reference was fucking amazingly put in there. It's so good, it's not distracting, it's not in your face, it's there if you notice it, and it doesn't take away from the scene at all. Because Tetsuo's distressed nature makes it kinda make sense that his English is kinda broken. And it's immediately replaced by Tetsuo's begging too. Magneto then uses the fucking blood that he spat out earlier as a result of Tetsuo squeezing to make fucking saw blades, which is some of the coolest shit this entire season. And the Big Bang explosion is kinda breathtaking. They sell you on the sheer power of this, the brightness and the impact is insane for something that's just a big growing dome. And Magneto's scream is also really good, as is his grunt when he finally gets control of the expansion and uses it on Tetsuo. It really gives us the idea that this was an incredibly powerful attack, and Magneto had to put everything into it just to contain it. And then, Magneto puts him out of his misery. And finally, Tetsuo thanks him, and there's acknowledgement between the two. Chills. Just chills. This episode has an amazing script, with fantastic dialogue and interactions and a great dynamic. It's animated to near perfection, with amazing sound design, great vocal performances from the actors, and a breathtaking score that complements the episode fucking flawlessly. I can't stress enough how incredible this episode is. If all the Marvel DC episodes we got reached this standard of quality, I wouldn't even complain about the overabundance nearly as much, because this was a standout. My least favorite scene is probably just Tetsuo very slowly dodging shit and getting his arm cut off by random garbage. That was a bit awkward. But my favorite was just the entire ending. I don't count deaths in my favorite or least favorite scenes because they universally take one or the other, but everything leading up to the death here was great. What could possibly top this? Well,
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth!
Omni-Man vs. Homelander seems to be in some circles one of the most disagreed upon episodes. There are people who hate it and people who love it, and this is one of the biggest examples of a time that I acknowledge and understand almost every criticism against the episode. Yeah, I also think that if Homelander was portrayed as stronger, it would have been good. A big factor in this episode is that Omni-Man is a trained fighter while Homelander is a test tube baby who never had to push himself. However, this fight is portrayed in a way that if Omni-Man was also just a test tube baby, he still would have dominated by simply being so much stronger and faster. If Nolan had actually shown a degree of pain from Homelander's attacks, maybe just if Homelander landed a few when Nolan's equilibrium was thrown off in the air before dive-bombing him, that would have probably been better and solved the skill gap more. Perhaps it would have felt more cathartic to see Homelander get splattered if he was still a threat, because as it is, this is less the villain getting his dues and more like a puppy getting put down by a grizzly bear with a sawn-off shotgun. But despite the genuine problems that I understand the episode has, I still really love it. The analysis doesn't actually have much to do with that. I don't dislike it at all. I think Omni-Man's is perfectly serviceable for the most part and only really good at the very ending, while Homelander's I actually quite like. Homelander's has a more interesting flow and subject to it, I think, which in my opinion is likely just a result of spoiler territory. Nolan's most interesting character elements are comic only, at least at the time of this episode, while Homelander has a ton in the show to work with, so the spoiler issue only really hinders Nolan. And that good ending Nolan has, yeah, Homelander's ending plays off of that and is even better, it's fantastic. But the fight just works for me. First of all, it's no exaggeration to say this episode is a very likely candidate for the best looking in the season. The animation quality is extremely good, with this close but not quite art style to Invincible that if you look at for long enough could trick you into thinking it actually is from Invincible. Or if you look at it long enough you'll realize it's not. Outside of very few minor bits, there's no problems here. Everything is animated super fluently, they get across the impact of every big hit and the speed of every zoom really well. Effects on Homelander's heat vision are on point and the lighting of the kill is amazing. This episode is maybe the best setup of any in Death Battle's history. The silence in the background plays into the unsettling vibe as Nolan returns home and walks in to see Homelander in his living room. Or kitchen, dining room. I think that's what you call it in the America land. Drinking warm cocoa like he fucking owns the place without a care in the world and acting all coy. Nolan glances to his side, but it's quick enough that you could easily miss it. Homelander's speech here is really good. In my opinion, this episode has the best voice acting of the season altogether, because every single mannerism and inflection is so flawlessly on point that it's basically perfection. John's explanation of the importance of Homelander is on point. I don't think it could have been delivered any better, especially with the extremely cold way he addresses Nolan's dead wife. The reveal of Debbie's corpse is chilling and really well done, as is John's following delivery. Nolan here, he just drops a cold line telling Homelander exactly how badly he's fucked up, and John tries to brush off being threatened with laughter and posturing, and then's punched in the face. Now this opening flurry has good stuff in it. Homelander trying to use his heat vision but Nolan giving him no time to and just laying into him is great, but I don't really like how this looks. This is the 1L of the episode to me, because it doesn't look like Homelander is even really getting hit here, just bouncing as Nolan swings his arms back and forth. Wow, a lot of the episodes this season have a really awkward opening sequence, huh? But Nolan's following line is fucking amazing. A great callback to his line to the Flaxons, but written uniquely to this situation. It's incredible. This is the only time Homelander actually gets the upper hand in the fight, and it's pretty well done. The conveyance of speed is excellent, but not as excellent as this shot. Something about the way Nolan sends John flying and zooms up feels so fucking impactful to me. But when it comes to references, few in the entirety of Death Battle match the combination of Nolan holding a superhuman out to meet a public transitory system face first, and John using his heat vision to cut a plane in half. Yeah, the explosions are a bit odd, and the fact that we never actually see the plane crash, and it looks like the neighborhood beneath them is totally unaffected when we next see it before it explodes, is a bit weird, but it was cool. Nolan outdoing John in skill is shown pretty well here, and John's scream is really well done. It's the only wound he delivers to Nolan in this entire fight, really. But the ending really sells it. John is freaking out, and unlike Wanda, he is someone fragile enough to have a mental breakdown in this short a time span, when everyone sees him not only covered in blood publicly, but also getting his ass handed to him. Nolan just goes cope and comes at him, but John screams again and goes for a heat vision in the eyes, as Homelander is known to do. The delivery of his voice cracked declaration of killing everyone is amazing, and the way he says that this will just be one more neighborhood is actually really fucking sinister. And then Nolan shuts him the fuck up. This death is one of the best in all of Death Battle, shattering John's jaw so he can't speak, punching his heart out, and then feeding it to him in this extremely disturbing silhouetted shot. And then he just crushes John's head. Everything's amazing here. The callback to the start, the vocal deliveries from both actors, the fucking think mark framing reference and how they drew this shot, the gore and the pain in John's eyes as he screams a muffled death cry, it's all amazing. As is Nolan's sort of blunt and dry Merry Christmas to the crowd that's watching before he flies off. I really like too that Nolan kills John immediately after John threatens his son. Like when he saw John kill his wife, he decided to systematically beat him down. He wanted to make John's pain last, but the instant Homelander threatens his son as well, that crosses the line, and he fucking kills him there and then. It's excellent. I just love this episode's animation. It's stellar to me from a writing standpoint, though I do, as I said, understand the criticisms. Except for the track, Diabolical Invincible Me is flawless, and the only problem with it is that fucking name sucks balls. So yeah, my least favorite scene is definitely the kind of shitty starting flurry, and my favorite is the fucking Debbie reveal. The whole start even is just so good. With that being said, my favorite of the season should now be clear. Sauron vs Lich King was fighting an uphill battle when it was announced. I had just come off one of my most wanted matchups disappointing me greatly, and my expectations for this episode were through the roof. I expected a lot from it, and I thought for sure that I would end up disappointed in that regard even if it was good. However, this episode did not disappoint me in the slightest. In fact, it actually excelled past my expectations. Sauron and Lich King are some of the most grand and epic characters they've ever touched, and they did them super well. I love these analysis segments. These are my favorite set of analyses since Ganondorf vs Dracula or maybe Saitama vs Popeye, either of those. The start of Sauron's analysis is stupidly epic, and the music and writing goes a long way to convey the level of awe that Sauron inspires. The analysis flows story and versus analysis flawlessly, and has a good degree of that Season 2 style comedy, where if it's not funny to you, it still isn't distracting. It's just humorous quips and offhanded comments made by the host, and that works for me. The cutaway gag is surprisingly not terrible. I, in fact, like it. It's funny. I love this analysis, and Arthas's is also really solid. It hits similar beats really well. It's entertaining, it's fun, it sure does have a cutaway. It has an epic vibe, it's just all really solid. I love the analysis. I could watch it all day. But I could also watch the fight all day because my god, it's something else. I don't even know what to say because I discussed it at ridiculous length fairly recently. But to go over those points again in short, my only problem is this little bit where Arthas floats. This isn't even wrong, it just looks a bit weird. That's my least favorite shot of this fight. Yeah. The animation is incredible. We've not had many 3D fights that approach this level of visual quality. The effects for everything are on point, with Sauron's fire and Arthas' ice powers all looking insane. And the usage of color across the entire area is simply stunning. Starting blue and ending orange to signify Sauron has taken over, the amazing shot of the two fighting while the entire landscape is being altered, and the eyes of Sauron and Akka staring back at each other illuminating the night landscape. The erupting volcano is amazing, especially this shot of it in the distant background, one of many shots that are incredible, with the entire cinematography of the fight being excellent. From the various opening shots of Arthas that feel straight out of Warcraft, the looming shadow of Sauron overcasting Arthas as whispers go across them, Sauron lunging out of the steam of an exploded ice ball to go at Arthas' throat, the shot of Sauron after erupting the volcano that gets across his sheer size and impact, and of course the shot I mentioned earlier, one of many that has surprisingly good choreography, with the two's weapon swings all feeling weighty and impactful as they should, with the amazing sound design helping to carry the impact. Things as simple as Sauron taking a step forward and sitting his ass down have more impact than some entire episodes of Death Battle just due to the impeccable sound design. The ringing of the two hitting their weapons together is amazing, and it's the sound effects with their abilities, all of which are used really well. Arthas gets to summon things without them taking over the subject of the animation. He creates massive blizzards and throws ice around, but he also attacks with shadow at the end and uses the blight to successfully take Sauron's body down. While Sauron gets to use his fire multiple times to great effect, he shapeshifts into both the wolf and the Eye of Sauron and back to his original body, making great usage of that core part of his power. And the episode focuses on his hand clenching to use the ring for his abilities, which makes a lot of sense. The dialogue for Sauron turning into the Eye is some of the best, along with all the other dialogue. For the most part, neither character is shaken throughout this entire fight. Sauron has this slimy, underhanded feel, while Arthas has this overbearing dominance. They both carry themselves as if they think nothing of their opponent, like they don't see a foe worthy of conquering, but a stepping stone to get over and done with. There's the great dialogue when Sauron says he'll tear out Arthas' heart and he counteracts that. There's the amazing I see you usage, which is flawless in every way, delivered perfectly, and literally is Sauron telling Arthas in advance that his sneak attack failed before he even bothers turning around to deal with it. That is a power move. And there's Arthas finally saying something that's actually pissing Sauron off, when he claims that Sauron now serves him. The venom in Sauron's voice when he replies that he serves nobody is incredible. The audacity of this mortal man to claim that he now owns Sauron is the only thing Arthas says that angers his opponent, and Sauron wastes no time responding that he will show Arthas the very future where he dies. And Arthas uses the Eye of Akris to call Sauron's bluff and attack back, but in the end, it is Sauron who gets the last laugh. He lunges out and the two throw their attacks only for Frostmourne to shatter with a flashing of the Eye of Sauron. That was amazing. An incredible shot with insane impact as Sauron breaks Arthas' source of power, and the force of that blow travels past Arthas and shatters the Eye of Akris as well. The souls within Frostmourne circle Arthas, much like his canonical death, and he is shaken truly for the first time. Sauron quotes himself and tells Arthas that this is the end. He sends him to the sky with fire and souls, tearing the very essence of Arthas from his body, leaving the empty husk of what once was the Lich King to crash and die. This time, there will not be another Lich King, for the Lich King's entirety is now just a morsel of a soul that Sauron has devoured. This is a fucking phenomenal episode. one of my favorite in the show's entire history, and one that exceeded my expectations. In a world where most episodes fall short for various reasons, and I usually have to just accept what I got and come around to liking them despite my disappointment, the fact that this episode eclipsed what I wanted and came out so well is breathtaking. Carried as well by a phenomenal track. You know, this is probably the third episode this season where a fight that was complemented by a track that's... Yeah, okay. Kandro, Jonathan, Magneto, Tetsuo, you've got another one in your midst. I can't speak enough for my love for Sauron vs. the Lich King. And for the first episode featuring one of my favorite series that Death Battle has ever tackled, that means so much to me. Season 9 of Death Battle is one of the best seasons we've ever gotten, with minimal hiccups where most of the episodes I can't even call bad. They pulled out all stops for this season, and I am all for it. I think it excelled harder than almost any beforehand. It's something of a shame that it had to be this year, though. 2022 has been the worst year of my life. So many things happened that ruined it for me and broke me. One of which was even directly caused by Death Battle in that one episode I don't acknowledge. But for most of this year, these consistently good episodes have been one of the few small lights that has helped me keep going. And I can't thank the team enough for all the work they put in to make such a high quality season. I can only hope they carry this momentum into the future. I look forward to what they managed to give us in Season 10, and I wish the team all the best. Whew! Thank you, everyone who got to this point with this fucking feature film length video where I spend most of it praising a show that I love and a bit of it admonishing them. Admittedly, sadly, had to. You know, I'm going to keep my opinions genuine. I hope you enjoyed the video. You can tell me what you think. Leave your ranking down below. It's completely fine if you disagree with me, because frankly, no one is going to agree 100%. Even David, who is literally the same person as me, doesn't have the same ranking as me. Don't ask how that works. So, I'll say it now because I'm recording this currently in like 100 degree Fahrenheit plus heat in a fucking heat box of a study that makes everything feel like 20 degrees hotter on Christmas Day, because, you know, we in Australia, we have a hot summer. That's why Santa Claus never shows up. He shows up and he's like, ho ho, fuck me, this place is way too goddamn hot, and just pisses off. So yeah, Merry Christmas everyone, Happy Holidays if you don't celebrate Christmas. I hope you all have a great day, a great time in general, and I hope you all enjoyed this video that I spent a lot of time working on because I wanted to get it out for everyone to watch and hopefully enjoy. So I will, yeah. Thank you to all my supporters on Patreon. You're all listed right now. You're all fucking fantastic and phenomenal. Thank you so much for helping to support me. And if you want, you can support me as well with a like, with a subscribe, or by going to my Patreon and pledging on it. Is that the word? So everyone who supports me on Patreon, you'll get access to my Patreon Discord, where right now I'm going to read a bunch of quotes. I do this at the end of every major video like this. For this one, I want to do something special. I told people, what are your favorite quotes? Give me your favorite quotes from Season 9 Death Battle. So I'm going to be reading those out. If you expect any of my deliveries to be as good as the actual episodes, then you're just out of your fucking mind.
Country? Seriously? I'm not here for your country. I'm here for your planet. Remember earlier when I said I was going to feed you your own heart, and then you were all like, ha ha ha, shit, that was a great line, and then I punched you in the mouth? Yeah, I'm gonna do that thing with your heart I mentioned. You're such a pest, I'm powerful, I punch thee best. I'll tear out your heart. You will find nothing there.
Whoa, Vegeta, am I really that much taller than you?
I serve no one! No more witches. What's the matter? Are you going to cry?
I told you. It's no use! I am a doctor, and you ain't crazy. You don't have the same smile! I don't need a second opinion. Listen, welcome. I handle this on my own. Control it. Die! It hurts. Help me.
Merry Christmas. Never been hit by someone your own size before? You have to turn with the punch to reduce. Better.
Give me everything you've got, because I'm never going down!
Thank you. You're welcome. Don't cry, Sponge. Let's be super friends.
And that was the quotes I got. I had that up for a good few hours, and like by a few hours I mean about 17, and that's what I got. So those were apparently the most popular quotes within my Discord. So again, hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you guys at a later date, and please have a good one and have a great new year.